All right, so get this. We've got a Wall Street billionaire, lost hundreds of employees on 9/11, goes on to become a huge philanthropist, and now President Trump picks him for Commerce Secretary.
Yeah, that's not your typical path to a cabinet position, you're right.
What a life story, right?
Yeah. Howard Lutnick is, he's definitely not your average CEO. You know, his life has been marked by just incredible tragedy, but also this remarkable success.
So we're going to deep dive into Howard Lutnick today. By the end, you'll know not just who he is, but kind of what his journey tells us about how he might approach this really powerful position shaping American business.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Lutnick, he wasn't born into wealth or anything.
Right.
Grew up in a Jewish family on Long Island. His early life was marked by some pretty profound loss, actually.
It was.
So this isn't just another story about privilege. What happened?
Well, his mother died of lymphoma when he was still in high school, and then, tragically, his father passed away just a year later from complications during cancer treatment.
Wow, to lose both parents so close together at such a young age, I mean, that must have been incredibly difficult.
It was. And, you know, he essentially had to become the head of the family, supporting himself and his siblings. But amidst this tragedy, there was a glimmer of hope. You know, Haverford College actually offered him a full scholarship.
That's amazing. Talk about a turning point.
Yeah, it really was. It gave him the opportunity to pursue his education and really ultimately set him on the path to success. He graduated with an economics degree in 1983, and that same year, he joined Cantor Fitzgerald.
Cantor Fitzgerald, that's the global financial services firm.
Oh, exactly.
So he started at in the trenches and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming CEO in 1991 and chairman in 1996.
Right.
Wow, he was barely 40 years old.
Yeah.
So that's a meteoric rise. He clearly had a knack for finance.
He did. And he wasn't afraid to take risks, you know, embrace new ideas. He was a real champion of electronic trading, which was still in its very early stages back then. And, you know, this forward-thinking approach would really prove crucial later on, especially after 9/11.
Right, because we can't talk about Howard Lutnick without, addressing 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
His company was, right there, directly impacted by the attacks on the World Trade Center.
Yeah, tragically, Cantor Fitzgerald's offices were located in the North Tower, right above where the first plane hit. They lost 658 employees that day,
Oh, my God.
including Lutnick's own brother.
That's just heartbreaking. I can't even imagine the scale of that loss, two-thirds their workforce.
It was devastating. And Lutnick himself only survived because he was taking his son to kindergarten that morning. He was, you know, all of a sudden faced with this unimaginable task of having to rebuild his company and support the families of those who were lost.
I mean, that's got to be a level of pressure and grief that most of us can't even fathom.
Absolutely. And in the aftermath, he made some decisions that were viewed as pretty controversial. He initially stopped paychecks for the missing or deceased employees, which of course sparked a lot of anger and criticism.
Yeah, I can understand why people were upset. It probably felt like, adding insult to injury at the time.
It did. But it's important to remember the context. You know, the company was in a state of shock. They had lost two-thirds of their workforce.
Right.
There were some really serious concerns about whether it could even survive.
So he was just trying to stabilize the company in a very chaotic situation.
Yeah.
Did he eventually help the families?
He did. Lutnick eventually stepped up and provided financial support and health insurance to all the families of the victims.
Okay, so he did right by them in the end.
He did. And he also established the Cantor Fitzgerald Relief Fund, which has actually distributed hundreds of millions of dollars to families of 9/11 victims and those affected by other natural disasters, too.
Wow, that's a pretty significant act of philanthropy.
It is, yeah. He also started Global Charity Day, an annual event where Cantor Fitzgerald and BGC partners donate all their revenue for a day to charity.
It's incredible they've raised millions for various causes over the years.
They have.
It seems like giving back became a big part of his life after 9/11,
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, was it a way to kind of cope with the tragedy, or did he always have this philanthropic side to him?
That's a good question. And it's worth noting that his generosity extends to his alma mater, Haverford College, as well. You know,
Yeah.
He's funded scholarships, buildings, numerous other initiatives there. So there's definitely a pattern of giving back. But his story gets even more complicated when you look at his political ties.
Oh, this is where things might get a little messy. What are we talking about here?
Well, Lutnick is a longtime supporter of Donald Trump. He was a major fundraiser for both of Trump's presidential campaigns
Wow.
and even co-chaired his 2024 transition team.
So they're pretty tight.
They are. And some people speculate that Lutnick's influence may have played a role in Trump's decision to nominate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services Secretary,
Wow.
which, as you know, was a very controversial choice.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is. And it raises some important questions about what we can expect from Lutnick as Commerce Secretary, especially given his close relationship with Trump and his history of strong opinions.
Okay, I'm definitely starting to see why this appointment is raising eyebrows.
Yeah.
So we've got a self-made billionaire, a 9/11 survivor, a philanthropist, and a staunch Trump ally. It's quite the mix.
It is. And to understand what all of this means for his role as Commerce Secretary, we need to dig a little deeper.
All right, let's do it. I'm ready to dive into the next chapter of this story.
You mentioned strong opinions before, and there are definitely a few that have kind of raised eyebrows even among his supporters.
Okay, all ears. What kind of controversies are we talking about?
Well, let's start with his defense of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s stance on vaccines. Kennedy, as you know, has been a vocal proponent of the debunked claim that vaccines cause autism.
Right.
This is a viewpoint that has been thoroughly discredited by the scientific community, of course.
Right.
But Lutnick has publicly defended Kennedy's position, despite the overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
So Lutnick supports this.
He does, yeah.
That's concerning. And it makes you wonder how much weight he gives to, scientific evidence when he's forming his opinions. What else has he said that's caused a stir?
Well, at a Trump rally last month, he made some comments that raised questions about his understanding of economic policy. He seemed to almost romanticize the early 1900s when America relied very heavily on tariffs.
Tariffs, as in taxes on imported goods.
Exactly. He talked about how there was no income tax back then, and tariffs were basically the main source of government revenue.
Wow.
He kind of painted it as this simpler, more prosperous time.
But wouldn't going back to a tariff-heavy system be disastrous for the economy today? I mean, the world is so interconnected now.
That's the main concern, yeah. Economists have pointed out that relying solely on tariffs in today's globalized economy could lead to trade wars, higher prices for consumers and ultimately economic harm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it seems like Lutnick might be kind of stuck in the past a little bit when it comes to economic policy.
Yeah, it's a possibility, but he's also a very shrewd businessman.
Right.
So it's possible that he sees tariffs as more of a negotiating tactic,
Okay.
a way to kind of get leverage in trade deals.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to wait and see how he actually uses them. But his stance on tariffs definitely raises some red flags. What about this Project 2025 thing? I read that Lutnick is involved in it somehow.
Ah, yes, Project 2025. This is where things get really interesting. It's essentially a blueprint laid out by conservative think tanks for how a second Trump administration would radically reshape the federal government.
Okay, so we're talking big changes here.
We are, yeah. They're advocating for things like shrinking the federal workforce, privatizing some government functions, and significantly reducing regulations on businesses.
And Lutnick supports this plan.
He does. He's been deeply involved in Project 2025, even helping to select potential nominees for key positions if Trump were to win a second term. And the Commerce Department actually plays a pretty central role in their plans.
So what would that look like? What kind of impact could Lutnick have as Commerce Secretary under this Project 2025 framework?
Well, they're calling for using tariffs much more aggressively, not just as a bargaining chip, but as a tool to kind of reshape global trade in America's favor. They believe it's a way to protect American jobs and businesses from foreign competition.
But isn't that just a recipe for trade wars? And wouldn't that hurt consumers in the long run?
Yeah, it's definitely a very risky strategy, and some experts argue that it's a simplistic solution to a very complex problem. They say it could lead to retaliation from other countries, disrupt global supply chains, and ultimately just drive up prices for everyone.
So it seems like Lutnick's vision for the Commerce Department is pretty bold and potentially quite disruptive.
Yeah.
But is he all talk, or does he actually have the experience and the temperament to actually pull this off?
That's the million-dollar question, right? His track record at Cantor Fitzgerald definitely shows that he's a decisive leader, he's a risk taker, and he's definitely not afraid to make tough decisions. But whether those qualities will translate well to the political arena and whether he'll be able to kind of navigate the complexities of global trade and diplomacy, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of unknowns here. So what should listeners be paying attention to as Lutnick steps into this new role?
Well, I think it's really crucial to watch how he balances his loyalty to Trump with the needs of American businesses and the broader economy. Will he be willing to stand up to the president if he disagrees with a particular policy, or will he simply rubber stamp Trump's agenda?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess we should also keep an eye on how he uses his power to influence trade deals and economic policy. Will he be a pragmatist who seeks compromise and cooperation, or will he be more of a hardliner who's willing to risk, trade wars and economic instability?
Exactly. Those are the key questions that will really shape his legacy as Commerce Secretary. And for you, the listener, those decisions could have a very direct impact on your job, the products you buy, and just the overall health of the economy.
Okay, so we've got a pretty clear picture of the potential risks and rewards of Lutnick's appointment. But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really touched on yet, and that's his philanthropic side.
Right.
How does that factor into all of this?
That's a great question, and it's one we should definitely explore. After all, this isn't just about economics and politics. It's about understanding the motivations and values of the man who now holds this position of significant power.
Let's dive into that next. I'm curious to see how his philanthropic work might inform his approach to this new role.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about Howard Lutnick so far, his success in the business world, his connections in politics, even some of his, more controversial stances. But there's this whole other side to him we need to look at, this the philanthropist.
Yeah, it really is an interesting contrast.
Right.
You have this driven Wall Street guy who's also incredibly generous with his, with his fortune. It makes you wonder what's really motivating him?
Yeah, is it genuine, wanting to help people? Or, a sense of duty because of 9/11. Or maybe it's even, strategic, a way to kind of, build his image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's hard to say for sure. But, his actions seem to suggest that he really is dedicated to giving back, remember the Cantor Fitzgerald Relief Fund?
Right.
I mean, that's helped so many families affected by 9/11 and even other disasters, too.
Yeah, and he's given so much to Haverford College, funding scholarships, buildings, all sorts of things.
Right, and we can't forget Global Charity Day either. I mean, he's essentially giving away a whole day's worth of his company's profits. That's huge.
That's a big commitment. But how does all this giving back, this side of him, how does it relate to his new job as Commerce Secretary? I mean, he's not exactly running a charity now.
True, but it does give us some clues about his, his values, the things he thinks are important. Take his focus on education at Haverford. That might tell us he believes in, investing in people, which is really key for economic growth.
Oh, that's interesting. And all his work with the Relief Fund?
Yeah.
That shows that he cares about people who have suffered and gone through tough times.
Exactly. And that experience of rebuilding after 9/11, of supporting those families and communities when they needed it most, that could totally shape how he approaches policy decisions that impact, American workers and businesses.
So maybe there's a real sense of empathy there, he understands how economic changes can actually hurt people.
Maybe, yeah. But, it's also worth remembering that some people see his philanthropy as a way to, maybe deflect criticism or even gain some political influence.
So maybe it's not all, totally pure intentions.
Well, yeah, there are always those questions about, what's behind these really big acts of giving, especially when it's someone so powerful.
That's true. So after really diving deep into Howard Lutnick, what's the big takeaway for our listeners today?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious that he's complicated, full of contradictions.
Right.
He's a survivor, he's a builder, he gives back, and he's definitely a fighter. And now he's taking on this role that could really change the American economy and how it fits in with the rest of the world.
Wow, what a mix.
Yeah.
Ambition, tragedy, this philanthropy and all the politics. What does it all mean?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. I guess only time will tell how Howard Lutnick will actually use his power as Commerce Secretary. But one thing's for sure, his decisions will definitely have effects that go way beyond Wall Street and Washington.
And for you listening, it's definitely worth keeping an eye on this story as it unfolds, because the choices made by this, former trader turned cabinet member, well, they could end up affecting your life in ways you might not even realize.
That's right.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into Howard Lutnick, President Trump's pick for Commerce Secretary. Be sure to join us next time as we explore another fascinating topic that's shaping our world. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep thinking critically.